I frantically tried to wipe them away, but they wouldn't disappear. Instead, they glowed redder every time I touched them. I realized then that what had happened was no dream. I emerged from that night marked, the mark of the beginning of a new phase, more horrific than anything that had come before. And ever since that night, I have never slept peacefully. Every time I close my eyes, I hear whispers calling to me, see the throne again, and feel the ground shake beneath my feet, as if the entire world were pushing me toward a fate I had not chosen, a dark fate that eagerly awaited me. I sat in a dark corner of the room, surrounded by the fumes of incense that were seeping into my lungs as if they were feeding off my breath. The night was heavy, silent except for my ragged breathing. The moon peered through the crack of a narrow window, like a glassy eye watching me mercilessly, as if witnessing my life. Although its light was dim, I felt as if another eye was watching me, one that saw not through the light, but through the darkness that surrounded me on all sides. In the last few days, everything had changed. The voices that had initially been vague, intermittent whispers were no longer so. They had become clear, strict orders, as if issued by warlords who would not tolerate disobedience. The demons were pressuring me more than ever, pushing me toward a step from which there was no return. They had repeatedly drunk my blood and enjoyed the rituals they forced me to perform, but this time they weren't satisfied. They were demanding something greater, something eternal, that I sign over my entire lifespan, my soul, which cannot be bought or sold, to be their eternal slave. But my insides were cracking. The closer I came to surrender, the deeper I felt I was sliding into a bottomless abyss, as if the earth were opening its mouth to swallow me up. I became afraid of sleep, because sleep was no longer a rest, but an open gateway to vivid nightmares. I saw burned faces, featureless bodies, and groans that followed me wherever I went. What terrified me most was that they all called me by the same name, my own, Rock. Rock. You won't escape. One night, I couldn't bear it anymore. My feet led my trembling body to my father's old library. I had always avoided it. For me, it wasn't just bookshelves, but a graveyard of dark secrets. Every book in it radiated an energy that no one else could see, a heavy energy that pressed down on my chest. Yet a mysterious desire compelled me to extend my trembling hand, until I came across a massive tome bound in worn black leather. When I opened it, the scent of ancient blood emanated from it, as if the pages themselves had been drenched with offerings. The pages were filled with symbols I had never seen before, lines intertwined like snakes swooping down on their reader. But amidst these symbols, a single sentence stood out in ancient Arabic, clear as if it had been written specifically for me. Whoever writes their name and their blood on these pages will never be free again. My blood froze. Only then did I realize that what we had inherited was not merely sorcery, as I had suspected. It was not a game of black magic, but an ancient covenant, a chain that had been entwined around the lineage for centuries. My father was no ordinary sorcerer, and my grandfather was no scholar, as I had been told. They were mere tools in the hands of merciless entities. But the biggest surprise wasn't in the sentence, but in the paper folded between the pages. It was a letter in my father's handwriting. I shuddered as I read his words. My son, don't think I chose this path willingly. We were born its captives. Whenever I tried to resist, they made me pay a heavy price. Yet there is still hope in you. You may be different. Remember, they cannot force your soul if you resist. If you sign with your blood, it's all over. Be careful. I felt as if the earth was shaking beneath me. For the first time, I saw my father not as an ally of darkness, but as a victim like me. My eyes filled with tears, and my heart pounded violently. There was a glimmer of light, albeit a tiny one, but at the same time, a danger deeper than I had imagined. That night, they wouldn't leave me alone. I had a nightmare unlike any other dream. My father appeared before me, his body charred, his eyes lifeless, screaming in a terrifying voice. It's too late, Rock. You're ours, forever. I woke up in a panic, my face drenched in cold sweat, my chest heaving as if I'd just survived a drowning. But before I could catch my breath, I heard the whisper, not in my head, but directly in my ear, very close at hand. Tomorrow, your blood will be written, whether you like it or not. Only then did I realize I was on the threshold of a great confrontation. I had only two choices: resist until the end, or fall and become another link in the chain of eternal slavery. But inside me, one question screamed unanswered. Am I truly capable of resisting, or was I created from the beginning to be a slave to darkness? I could no longer distinguish whether I was walking a path chosen by my feet, or whether demons were still guiding my steps with invisible threads, embedded in my skin like invisible thorns. The last few days had been nothing but a slow guillotine, each moment more intense than the one before. Night was no longer my refuge, it had become my prison, and the walls no longer embraced me, but rather suffocated me. Everything haunted me, the echo of footsteps in the corridor, the flickering of the candle, and even the silence of the room began to scream at me, reminding me of a curse written upon me before I opened my eyes to this world. I sat alone in the narrow room, darkness enveloped me like an ancient shroud, and the single candle I had lit swayed as if melting from the terror surrounding it. Beside me lay the ancient book I had inherited from my father, the Dark Testament. It wasn't just a book, it was like a shrine containing family secrets, souls, and blood. How many times I tried to ignore it, to bury it in a dark corner of my memory, but something hidden drew me to it every time I tried to escape. When I reached out with my trembling hand and touched its cover, I felt as if I had touched an open wound that had been bleeding for centuries. A deadly chill coursed through my veins, making me shiver as if I had embraced death itself. I slowly opened the cover, and an ancient, putrid smell filled my nostrils. It wasn't just dust, it was the smell of graves. I contemplated the words that seemed to pulsate across the page, black lines that shimmered a deep red in the candlelight, as if they were written with ink and blood. I read the first sentence, and my body shuddered. He who makes a covenant, there is no salvation. He who breaks it, burns. And he who tries to break it, is consumed by the curse to the bone. I closed the book in one fell swoop, my heart pounding madly, my breath racing, and the memories of my ancestors crumbling before me like ghosts. Burned faces, extinguished eyes, screams buried beneath the dust. I knew at that moment that I was just another link in a cursed chain, and that this legacy wasn't something I could easily discard. But the night showed no mercy. The walls began to whisper, voices rising and falling, some calling out my name, others laughing savagely, as if celebrating my imminent downfall. Just when I thought I had reached the peak of madness, my father's face appeared before me. It wasn't a shadowy specter, but a dense, tangible presence, as if his body had come to life again. His eyes were a glowing ember, and his voice came out like the growl of a trapped beast. Rock, you've taken too long. The covenant demands you, and your blood is the price. If you don't finish what we started, the darkness will tear you apart from within. I shouted with a determination I didn't know I possessed. I will not be a slave. I will not surrender myself to you. I've had enough of these chains, of your blood, of your curse. I want to live, as a human being. But his voice turned into thunder piercing my bones. Either you continue, or you and everyone you love will be erased from existence. Then he disappeared, leaving behind a thick black smoke. It wasn't ordinary smoke, but a living thread that expanded and entered my chest. I felt my breath being forcibly drawn out, and my heart tightening as if it were being squeezed between claws. I fell to the ground, panting, tears streaming from my eyes uncontrollably. With the first light of dawn, I sat exhausted, besieged by tears and nightmares. I swore to myself that I would never open that book again, but deep within me whispered otherwise. I knew that even if I burned the book, the demons would not be extinguished by its fire. They are here, in my blood, in the echo of my name, in every breath I take. Then I realized the frightening truth. I was no longer facing just a book or an ancient curse. I was part of an eternal war, a war fought not with swords or fire, but with a fragile will, a soul torn between light and darkness. And now, I don't know if there is enough light within me to endure, or if I am just a tiny flame that will soon be extinguished in an unforgiving storm. I was no longer the man I was a few years ago. I was no longer the young man who easily surrendered to the will of demons, nor the sorcerer who believed his power came from rituals and blood. I was burdened by experiences, burdened by memories, surrounded by secrets, as if I carried a history of inherited curses on my shoulders. I was sitting that night in a dark room lit only by a weak candle, watching the wisps of smoke writhe like snakes searching for prey. As I followed them, the old whispers returned to my ears, the voices of my grandfather, my father, and all those connected to the cursed blood of my family. The voices were fragmented, but clear enough to awaken a question that had long haunted me: where does this path lead? I was not oblivious to the fate that awaited everyone who dealt with demons. I knew full well that the end always ended in blood and destruction, but I wanted to understand one thing: why us? Why my family in particular? In recent days, I've begun to discover that this wasn't just a coincidence, but that an ancient covenant had been concluded centuries ago. I found remnants of secret manuscripts hidden in a rusty chest left behind by my father, telling the story's beginning. One of my distant ancestors, a greedy man named Eldar, sold his entire lineage in exchange for power that lasted no more than 20 years. Since then, my family has been imprisoned by that covenant. Each generation is forced to carry on the dark legacy and commune with demons to keep the covenant alive. As I read those words, my blood froze. I thought I'd chosen this path of my own accord, but the terrifying truth was that I was merely a small cog in a hellish machine that had begun turning centuries earlier. But on the other hand, I was no longer that naive person. I learned a great deal about the weaknesses of demons, their contradictory natures, and how to exploit their internal conflicts. I realized that, despite their power, they are not invincible creatures. Rather, they fight among themselves just as humans do, each striving to be the strongest. That night, I decided to summon one of them, not to take orders as usual, but to force them to reveal what they were hiding. I drew the circle, prepared the ancient symbols, and slowly began the ritual. The smell of rot and blood pervaded the space, and the air felt heavy, almost suffocating. Then, suddenly, the wall in front of me trembled, and a huge-eyed being emerged from it, his body writhing like a lifeless shadow. At last, he said in a hollow voice, "An Eldar heir dares to call upon me without fear." I took a step forward, trying to sound steadfast. "I didn't summon you to take anything from me, but to tell me what awaits me if I break the covenant." The entity laughed, a laugh like the clang of iron. "If you break the covenant, a curse will fall upon your blood, the souls of your ancestors will be burned, and darkness will swallow you." I looked at him for a long time, then said, "And if I don't break it, I'll remain a slave forever. Isn't that so?" The entity was silent for a moment, then muttered, "Perhaps, but you're different from them. There's something light in you, and that worries us." When he said that, I felt I was approaching a truth I'd never imagined. For the first time, a demon acknowledged that I wasn't a carbon copy of my ancestors. For the first time, I saw fear in the enemy's eyes. I abruptly extinguished the candle, letting the entity evaporate into the darkness, muttering to myself, "I won't be an extension of them. I'll break the chain, even if it costs me my life." But deep down, I knew the real battle had yet to begin. The night that time wasn't like any other. It weighed heavier on my chest than a mountain slowly collapsing over my soul, as if the walls of the house that had always sheltered me were closing in on me, trying to swallow me up. I sat in my room, surrounded by a stifling silence, broken only by the creaking of the antique clock's hands, as if counting my last breaths. In front of me stood a rusty mirror I had inherited from my grandfather. A mirror that not only reflected features, but also revealed what was invisible to the eye. I stared at it for a long time, and was struck by a strange reflection, features that no longer resembled me. It was as if I were seeing another version of myself, one darker and more cruel. My eyes were sunk in dark pits, like two bottomless wells, swallowing every light that approached them. I extended my trembling hand to touch the mirror's cold surface, and I felt an unnatural coldness, a coldness like the touch of a dead hand reaching out from behind the glass. At that very moment, I heard a whisper creeping into my ear, a recurring whisper that pierced the silence of the room. "You won't be able to escape. We have been with you since your birth, and we will remain with you until your end." My body trembled like never before. I remembered what my mother had warned me about as a young child, when she would whisper to me as I lay in bed, that the blood of the family was bound by an ancient pact with demons, and that every generation was born with a ring of fire around its neck, invisible to the eye but slowly burning within the soul. I had thought it was a myth, but everything I experienced after my decision to repent made those words a stark reality. The demons began to pursue me in various forms. Sometimes they would creep like shadows on the walls, sometimes they would come in strange voices creeping from the depths of the night, voices calling my name and laughing a dry, bone-piercing laugh. Other times, they would invade me in recurring dreams, where I would find myself in a blackened arena, surrounded by tongues of flame and smoke, the air filled with endless screams. There, men with distorted faces, half human, half demonic, surrounded me, laughing so loudly that my ears shook until I nearly lost my mind. That night, terror and curiosity drove me to my father's old room. He had always kept the keys from me, and when he died, they remained locked until I broke the lock with my trembling hands. Inside was a heavy wooden chest, smelling of old smoke. I opened it slowly and found what I had never dreamed of seeing, strange books filled with symbols and talismans, worn pages, and seals covered in brown stains that looked like blood that had dried centuries ago. My eyes fell on a sentence written in worn ink. "Whoever attempts to break the covenant shall be hunted not only in this world, but in all worlds." My breath quickened, and I realized that my repentance was not just a new beginning, as I had thought, but a declaration of war. It was no longer just a personal decision to abandon magic. It was a direct confrontation with a bloody legacy, with a curse whose roots ran deeper than I could imagine. Suddenly, in the midst of that deadly silence, I heard slow footsteps behind me. I turned quickly, but there was no one there. However, the mirror in the corner of the room didn't reflect just me. It revealed another face, with strange features, its eyes blazing with red sparks like embers, and its mouth set in an inhuman smile, a smile that seemed to promise eternal torment. I tried to scream, but my voice choked in my throat, as if an invisible hand were gripping my neck. I felt caught between two worlds, the world of the living, fading away around me, and the world of shadows, slowly swallowing me up. Since that night, I've lost confidence in myself. I'm no longer sure if I'm still fully human, or if half of my soul has become theirs. And every time I looked in the mirror, that creature's face would smile back, reminding me that the end hadn't begun yet, but was near. I had no idea that the night could turn into a continuous nightmare, stretching above my head like a black, sunless sky. I lived within the walls of this ancient house, as if they were slowly closing in on me, one room after another, as if the house itself had become a prison woven by invisible hands. Every time I tried to convince myself that what was happening was nothing but an illusion or fleeting fantasies, the events would multiply before me like broken glass, each piece reflecting my face differently, and every attempt to put them together would hurt me more. On that particular night, we sat around the dinner table. A heavy silence hung over the place, even the sound of spoons seemed disturbing, as if knocking on doors we dared not open. I looked at my family members one by one. Pale faces, wandering eyes, blank stares searching for something mysterious beyond the confines of the room. My mother didn't eat a single bite, just staring into space as if hearing a whisper we couldn't hear. As for my father, he played his fingers on the wood with strange confusion, like someone counting the moments awaiting an inevitable fate. I couldn't stand it any longer, so I broke the silence, saying, why do we live as if we're prisoners? What's going on in this house? But my words didn't bring an answer, they only stirred a pent-up anger. I saw their gazes turn mysteriously sharp, as if they were all sharing an unspoken secret. Suddenly, a violent knocking sounded on the front door. A heavy knocking, like the grip of a creature devoid of mercy. We all turned around in panic, and no one dared to rise. The knocking continued, growing louder by the second, until it seemed to shake the walls themselves. Finally, my father stood up hesitantly, as if his feet were being forced to drag. He opened the door slowly, but there was no one there. The corridor outside was engulfed in fog, writhing like smoky snakes. He quickly closed the door and returned, but his lips didn't say a word, only his eyes betrayed a hidden fear. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my room, watching the shadows move across the walls as if they were living beings. Sometimes I saw them converge, overlap, then suddenly separate, sometimes taking the shape of a hand or a mysterious face. Suddenly, I felt a chill creep into my ear, then a hoarse whisper pierced the stillness of the room. Your secrets are ours. You are not free. My body shuddered. I turned quickly, but saw nothing. Yet the voice repeated itself, this time clearer, until I could distinguish its words. I tried to stand up, but the air froze around me, and a stifling, musty smell filled the room, as if something rotten was rising from its grave. I realized I wasn't alone, that something shared the room with me. In the morning, I told my sister what had happened. She wasn't surprised, she merely gave me a cold smile and said in a cryptic tone, "You're just beginning to see what we've been seeing for a long time." My blood froze. Her words weren't a comfort, but an outright threat. Did the whole family know about this curse? Was I the only fool living in the shadows, unaware of the truth? I couldn't remain idly by. That day, I spent hours searching every corner of the house. Instinct led me to the basement, a place I always avoided. There, amidst the dust and darkness, I spotted a huge wooden box, covered with a network of rusty chains. The box was like a part of the earth itself, as if the house had been built over it to remain buried forever. I reached out with my trembling hand and touched it. At that moment, I felt a strange heat seep through my skin, a living warmth, as if the souls imprisoned inside were moving and pressing, begging to be released. I took a step back, but something inside me compelled me to open it. A mixture of fear and curiosity held me in place. I stood in front of it for a long time, torn between my desire to uncover the secret and my fear that this box was the gateway that would free all my nightmares. I knew that opening it might change everything, but at the same time, it might be the only way to understand the truth. Amidst that hesitation, a new voice crept in, a voice deeper and more terrifying than all the previous whispers, coming from inside the box itself. Open. We've waited centuries. My limbs froze. For the first time, I realized that I wasn't just facing a haunted house or phantom voices, but something greater, an ancient covenant that bound my blood to a dark circle that had yet to be broken. From that moment, I knew that my life would never be the same again. I was no longer just a human being searching for reassurance. I had become a participant in an ancient war between shadows and light, between a demonic covenant and a desperate will to survive. I no longer have a firm conviction about anything. Everything I once considered true is now just scattered fragments, crumbling before the creeping mystery that surrounds me from all sides. It's as if I live inside a dark labyrinth, its walls closing in on me whenever I try to escape, its floor shaking beneath my feet whenever I search for a way out. That night, I sat alone in my room, darkness swallowing everything around me except for the light of a candle that danced fearfully, as if it, too, feared going out. I tried to write down what I discovered, scattered words on yellowing paper groaning with age, just to keep the truth from getting lost in the maelstrom of events. But as I wrote, strange sounds filtered through the walls of the house, faint voices resembling whispers, as if the house itself were preserving old conversations it didn't want to erase. The walls were pulsing with life, as if bearing witness to secrets known only to them. At that moment, I realized that what surrounded my family wasn't merely the manipulation of hidden entities stalking us, but rather a heavy legacy spanning generations. A legacy like a black knot that runs through our blood like a slow poison, corrupting the soul before it corrupts the body. I began to connect the events. Each family member was hiding a small secret from the other, but when those secrets came together, they formed a vast network of collusion with unseen forces. When I left my room, I found my father sitting alone in the dark hall. He didn't look like himself, his eyes sunk in deep reverie, his body as still as a dead statue. I approached him, but he didn't turn around. He only whispered in a hoarse, barely audible voice. "We've been too late. Blood is beginning to exact its price." I felt a chill run through my veins. Did he mean blood shed in the past? Or were our souls now demanded as a tribute to an ancient covenant? I moved closer, and desperate boldness prompted me to ask, "Father, what do they want from us? Why us in particular?" He slowly raised his head, looked at me with eyes that shone with a strange gleam, a mixture of pain and resignation, and said, "Because we don't fully own ourselves. Half of our souls are ours, and the other half belongs to an ancient covenant signed centuries ago. We are not fully human." His words were like a dagger piercing deep within me. I no longer felt any ground beneath my feet. Was it possible that I was merely an extension of the curse, a small piece in a grand game controlled by unknown forces? That night, I didn't sleep. I moved between rooms, watching the shadows dance on the walls like living beings. The sounds grew clearer, whispers that remembered my name, cold laughter that cut through my silence like knives, and songs in an unknown language that carried within their letters a chill that stung my soul. When I returned to my room, I was shocked to find a black book on my desk. It hadn't been there a moment ago. Its cover was dark, devoid of any title, as if darkness itself was created to be its cover. I opened it with trembling hands and saw pages filled with strange symbols and names, yet they all seemed vaguely familiar, as if I'd seen them in an old dream or a recurring nightmare. When I reached the last page, my blood froze. In red script that looked like it was real blood, a short sentence was written. "It all begins when you speak your name among them." My entire body trembled. I realized I was standing on the edge of a deep abyss, one step enough to plunge me straight into the heart of the curse that surrounded us. But the question that haunted me continued: am I ready to face what awaits me in the darkness, or am I just another victim in an endless series of stolen lives?